Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Ducksy Gaming and my first build guide for 3.15. Now this, barring a disastrous practice session later tonight, is going to be my league starter for this league. Now I've tested this as much as I can under 3.15 conditions, so I didn't use any utility flasks, I removed second wind from my setup, and as I'll also cover off later on, due to some gem swaps in 3.15 and the mana leech nodes on the claw wheel, DPS and mana aren't going to take a hit on this build. We can swap some gems around to maintain the current DPS, and because of the claw nodes and other things we can do with our build, we're always going to be able to sustain mana. Now let's address the elephant in the room first. How can I say it's 3.15 conditions when I'm running a 6-link with 2020 gems that some have been nerfed pretty hard? So I'll explain why, and if anything, this build actually gains a little bit of DPS. So let's look at our 6-link setup. So if we look at the 3.14 setup and the new one side by side, it will give us a better picture. So let's look at the gems first. The main skill gem is Lightning Strike, which has had its damage effectiveness pushed from 180% to 225%. Now what this means is any added damage that we have, instead of timesing it by 180%, it times it by 225%. Added cold looks unchanged. I couldn't see anything in the patch notes. So any unchanged gem that gives flat damage is a DPS increase because of the damage effectiveness from Lightning Strike. The next support gem that we used, and we're still going to use, is Nightblade support, and this got buffed really hard. At 2020, we get 138% crit multi, which is a 39% increase on the old gem. We get 20% increased crit chance. Really importantly, we get 1% flat crit chance added to our base. And we get 38% increased elusive effect, and this is buffed from 28% last league. Now those 3 gem changes alone give us a lot more damage, which is going to help negate the nerfs on the gems we're going to talk about now. So the first one we'll address is LE damage with attacks. We're getting rid of this gem. It got nerfed way too hard to the point where it's really not giving us much extra damage at all. So what we've swapped in is increased critical strikes. What this gives us is another flat 2% onto our base crit, and then 137% increase in critical strike chance. With the Nightblade gem, the crit strike gem, and power charges that we'll pick up later on, we can cap our crit at 100% without having to use a diamond flask. Now the remaining 2 gems stay the same, which is Inspiration and Trinity. So for Inspiration, we lost about 10% more elemental damage, which does suck, but it gives us 25% more, and it gives us a big reduction in the mana cost of the skill, which is really important now we're getting more mana multipliers on our gems. Trinity again is still enough damage to be our next best gem. We do lose 4% LE pen and a whopping 20% more elemental damage. So this has gone from 50% to 30%, so the gems basically had a 40% nerf. Really, this build sort of come about by accident because I loaded POB, brought my build in, upgraded to the new path of building with all the new gems, swapped 2 things around and noticed that the damage actually went up a tiny bit. So really, this build alongside the one I had in the previous league is really similar. The only thing we do is we ascend differently. In 3.14, I took the onslaught nodes really for defensive purposes, but with them butchering the first onslaught node, it's now not really worth it. We can just get onslaught from a flask. So we're now going to go the frenzy charge way, go more max frenzy charges and get more damage and speed that way. So before we move on, we'll just quickly address the mana issues with a lot of builds in 3.15. Now because we're using claws, we get access to mana leech nodes. And this basically on its own solves our mana problem because we'll get between 130 to 150 mana leech rate per second. What we're also going to do is we're going to use a chest at endgame that's got minus 15 mana cost to slotted gems. Because I didn't take the frenzy nodes before, I had to have frenzy on hit chest. I don't need that anymore because I'm rerouting the way I do my ascendancy. So all we really need is a 6-link minus 15 mana cost chest, which are not too expensive once you get a little way into the league, and it's not something we need right away. We shouldn't need any minus costs to be okay. If we do, we can just either buy a minus 6 gem or craft it ourselves when we unlock the craft. Another thing just to quickly note is I am running a level 4 Enlightened in the footage, but you don't need that straight away, you just run a lower level Precision. We'll quickly go through the other links that make up this build. These are all in the path of building, so I'm just going to cover it off really quickly. We have a cast and damage setup with a mortal call and increased duration. If this starts causing issues because of mana, we can just drop increased duration. We run in an unlinked Flame Dash, and then a separate 4-link to get Fortify, which is Vigilant Strike, Fortify, Enhance, and Ancestral Call. This combined gives us a buff of over 20 seconds for Fortify. Now I think once we introduce the mana cost chest, we can probably dump this whole setup and just go Whirling Blades, Fortify, Faster Attacks, and again Enhance. It's just really what way you want to do it, but because Flame Dash has been hit quite hard, we might be better to go Whirling Blades and then just have an unlinked Flame Dash just across any gaps. We don't have a curse setup as we're using a curse on hit ring and we're actually using a mark, but before this just manually cast Assassin's Mark. We take nodes in a tree that gives Culling Strike against marked enemies and makes us do a lot more damage to marked enemies. You won't need this mark when clearing, it's really only for bosses. For auras, we're going to run Anger as this gives us the biggest DPS boost, and there's some really good Watcher's Eyes that we can pick up later on that give you a lot of extra damage when you're running Anger. We use Herald of Ice for a bit of extra cold damage and to get some Shatter Explosions going, and then we run Precision to help cap our accuracy and critical chance. Other than that, I'll just run a solitary Ancestral Protector for an attack speed boost and only again drop that on bosses. The gameplay on Lightning Strike is really simple. You just run through the map, one-shot most packs, you use Vigilant Strike every 20 seconds or so to keep up Fortify. At bosses, you drop your totem, apply your mark, and then if you're running Vaal Lightning Strike, you'd use that and then normal Lightning Strike. So on bosses, you want to try and position yourself about one body's width away from the boss, because that means that your melee part and your projectile part of the skill all hit the boss and you basically get double damage. If it's a boss who constantly moves, don't worry too much about positioning because you can spend all your time trying to find a perfect position only for the boss to move. Now, as you'll see in the video, I'm not using Vaal Lightning Strike. Now, this is a decision I made because it was really meant for mapping. I've gone Anomalous Lightning Strike because the projectiles pierce 3 additional targets. If you're doing an all-round build, I would definitely just run Vaal Lightning Strike because it adds about 40% DPS on bosses. So my idea for Flasking in 3.15, I will say is optimistic, possibly. What I want to do is basically have 2 Phasing Flasks, 2 Onslaught Flasks, and 1 Life Flask. And I'm going to use the Phasing and Onslaught Flasks in pairs. So they're all going to have an Enkindling Orb used on them so that it buffs the duration and buffs what they do, but it stops you gaining skills on the flasks that are in use. So what we'll do is we'll maybe have 1 Onslaught and 1 Phasing Flask running. While they're running, it's filling up the other 2. Then when they're empty, you use the 2 that are filled up, and then the first 2 start filling up as you go along. No idea how it's going to work, but it's the way I'm going to try and work that. And then we'll just have a curse removal on one of the flasks, because there's not really a good way to get any sort of curse effect reduction on this build. So we're just going to put them onto lots of flasks. So I'll quickly run through the 2 skill trees that we have for the build, but both are available in the path of building. So the first tree is for early, when we don't have any gloves that strike an additional target and we don't have any of the clusters. So to help with clear, we path down to Tribal Fury, but later we respec those nodes, add cluster jewels, pick up power charges, and that's when our crit's going to start hitting 100%. But even with Tribal Fury set up and mediocre gear, we can easily get to 1 mil combined DPS. Then you add in your Vaal skill and you can get another 500,000. So we can do most of the content on the normal budget build. It takes a while to kill bosses, but we're going to be so tanky it doesn't matter. And then the second skill tree, as I said, is when you aim, when you've got more currency, this is the tree that you aim for. You want Cluster Jewels with Storm Rider, as that gives us power charges. And then Sadist is good because it adds damage if we've shocked, chilled, or ignited an enemy. As long as you've got some sort of fire, cold, and lightning damage, because we crit 100%, you're always going to have these effects on enemies. For medium clusters, any 2 passive crit jewels are fine, but I think Basics of Pain and Pressure Points are the best combo. And then for small clusters, we go Surge in Vitality for the life and the life regen. Other additions you want to look for in the build and on the tree are the Watcher's Eye we discussed earlier, which gives you more damage when you're affected by anger. You want to look for a lethal pride jewel. You're going to have to divine this until you get nodes that look good. But essentially you're looking for increased life, increased damage, intimidate on hit, and then increased fortify effect. I'm going to hopefully be bringing a separate leveling guide out, as league starting as this build is going to be quite rough because you Z DPS. You're going to survive everything, you're not going to die, but it's going to take you a bit longer to get through the campaign than a lot of other builds. In regards to leveling and ascendancy, for bandits, we're definitely going to take Alira. Resists are handy, mana's definitely handy now, and crit multi is always good. So next we're going to cover off the defenses and what makes this build an absolute tanking unit. I've got this image that I've pulled from Path of Building, which shows you how much damage we can mitigate and potentially take. Now I do take these with a pinch of salt, so I'm not sure they're 100% right, but as you can see, with capped resists, including chaos, we can take a ton of damage. So let's break the layers down. Firstly, we have Wind Dancer, which gives us 20% less damage taken if we've not been hit recently. If we've been hit recently, it gives us more evasion. We then add in Fortify into the build for 20% less damage taken, and we've got an option to pick up some Fortify nodes on our Lethal Pride. We then add our dodge from our Ascendancy, from Elusive, from our Quartz Flask, and from Acrobatics, and we get a minimum of 61% attack dodge and 51% spell dodge. When we're at maximum elusive effect, we cap out attack dodge at 75% and spell dodge at 71%. You could then cap spell dodge by crafting onto a chest if you wanted to. On our shield, we look to get anywhere from 1 to 3% to max resistances from a Shaper Shield, and this can put us at 78% all resists. We then get 1% from Crystal Skin, which can take us to 79% on all the elemental resistances. And then to take advantage of this, we then craft physical damage taken as elemental damage on our helmet and our body armor, and we can easily get up to 25% of this. All these different things combined make us really, really tanky, as you'll see from the footage. We also get lots of life leech from our claw, and we get life recovery from our clusters. So even when we are getting hit, we're leeching, we've got life recovery, we've also got bursts of life recovery from the cluster jewels. The good thing about this build is it's easy to concentrate on defense first, because building the defense part of this build is not expensive. You can then look to slowly upgrade your DPS as the character progresses. Now that covers off the basics of the build. There are two Path of Buildings linked. I played this build for well over 100 hours lastly, got the character to 97 and had a ton of fun doing it. I'm going to have a look at league starting over the next few hours and see the best way of doing this, because I really want to give this build a go from the off. I'll just maybe accept a slightly rougher league start than normal. However, I think we can find a way to do it, as I did level this character in Gauntlet and made it to maps fairly quickly, but it was my second character, so I had money to do crafting. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. I'm sure there's lots I've missed out. I just didn't want this build to go on and be 30, 40, 50 minutes long, especially because I am going to pull a full leveling guide up and bring that out to you guys as soon as I can. So if you enjoyed this kind of content, please consider liking and subscribing, and take care and see you in the next video.